Alright everyone, better late than never. We have to review the new iPad Pro, but more than review, we have to compare it to the older iPad Pro. Now I don't think I've ever compared an iPad on this channel, so this might be the first, but I did pick up the iPad Pro 4th gen, but I did pick up the 12.9 inch one. I had the iPad Pro 11 inch one, but in terms of the speed and everything, there's no difference between the speed of the 12.9 inch iPad and the 11 inch iPad. They're exactly the same. So I'm going to be comparing everything. The build quality and everything is about the same as well too. So really the biggest difference, at least visually, going from an iPad Pro 2018 to an iPad Pro 2020 would probably be that camera. That was one of the first things that came into my mind, but I'll go and hit on everything in a second. But pricing wise, the iPad Pro 2018 models have gone down in price quite a bit, so they don't cost, the $1,000 for the top tier model and whatever. They've gone down substantially. With the iPad Pro 4th gen, it's kind of expensive right now, so I'll go ahead and leave both of these linked down below for the cheapest prices that I find on Amazon, so you can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the front, one iPad is 1.5 years older pretty much than the other one. They're both about a year and a half difference, but really it doesn't really look like it at all. They look almost exactly the same for the most part, except for that camera in the back. Now, between on the front, they both have pretty much the exact same screens for the most part, the same bezel around the display as well. Some have stated that the Face ID is a little bit better on the new iPads, but I haven't really been able to tell that much. They look almost exactly the same for the most part, and for unlocking for my face, it's almost the same. They both have True Tone. They both have that awesome feature of that 120Hz refresh rate, which is honestly one of my favorite features ever. So for sure, when it comes down to it, I'll definitely tell you the iPad Pro, the whole entire lineup, the 2018 model and the 2020 lineup, have some of the best displays that I've ever seen on a tablet, which is really cool. And even going beyond tablets, I think it's really cool that we have that 120Hz refresh rate on a screen this big, especially on an iPad. So the screens on both are extremely good, so one really doesn't blow the other one out of the water when it comes down to that. They both have USB Type-C on the bottom, which is really cool. And on the back, like I've stated a billion times, the iPad Pro from 2018 has that single camera setup, where the iPad Pro of 2020 has kind of a triple camera setup, but it's more like a dual camera setup with the LiDAR sensor, which is really cool. Now, we'll talk about those cameras in a second and kind of, where I stand when it comes down to it. But in terms of the way they feel in the hand and everything, exactly the same. They feel almost exactly the same when it comes down to it. And there's no IP certification, nothing like that. They both support Apple Pencil, the Apple Pencil 2 as well. So one really doesn't blow the other one out of the water when it comes down to that either. So in terms of the outside, for the most part, that really pretty much covers it up. Now, hitting on the software, this is where things are a little interesting. So the iPad Pro from 2018 started off with iOS 12. It did get iPadOS 13, obviously, and it's going to be lasting for quite a while as well. Now, the one thing is that if you guys aren't familiar with Apple's software lifecycle updates, the way they update their phones and their tablets isn't necessarily like the year they came out. Sometimes it's more so about the chipsets inside. So with the iPhone SE 2 that just came out, that has the same chipset as the iPhone 11. So even though it came out and it's a newer phone than the iPhone 11, it's still going to be getting these same exact software updates as the iPhone 11, even though it's cheaper and all that, because of the chipsets inside. Now with these two, they are at their core pretty much the same chipsets. The weird thing is that apparently the original iPad Pro was underclocked. They basically had an 8-core CPU in it, but they actually took out a core, so there was only 7 cores running or something like that. I don't really remember. So the iPad Pro from 2018 has the A12X Bionic chip, with the iPad Pro from 2020 has the Apple A12Z Bionic chip. So I don't know if one's going to blow the other one out of the water when it comes down to these software updates. If I had to say it, I'll probably tell you that both of them are going to get the same software updates. So even if you get the 2018 model or the 2020 model, they're both probably, in my opinion, going to be getting the same software updates. So even though the new iPad is the newer one, it came out a year and a half later, and it's, started off with iPadOS 13.4 or whatever versus iOS 12 on the iPad Pro, I would still probably say that the iPad Pro from 2018 and 2020 are probably going to be getting the same software updates, which is not a bad thing, but I do think it's kind of weird because, if the iPhone XS were to get the same software updates as like the iPhone 11, or even vice versa, or like if the iPhone 10 got the same software updates as the iPhone 11, I think a lot of people might be, surprised and even kind of mad about it in a way. I would be happy about it, but I don't know. But I think between these two, it's happened before. One generation of phones gets the same software updates as another generation, so it happens all the time, but we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. But the software is still great. It's very minimal. Apple did a really good job when they switched over to iPad OS 13 and kind of switched out their whole life cycle and didn't make it just so focused on iOS and, depending on the iPhones. They really made it its own operating system, kind of, which is really cool. And iPads still have a lot of cool capability that a lot of iPhones don't even have. So when it comes down to the software, for sure, at the end of the day, they're both probably going to be getting the same exact software updates, in my opinion, but I could be wrong, who knows. So that pretty much covers up the software. Now hitting on the performance. So the iPad Pro from 2018 has the Apple A12X Bionic chip, octa-core CPU, and 4 gigs of RAM on all the models with 6 gigs RAM on the top tier model. Where the iPad Pro from 2020 has the A12Z Bionic chip, octa-core CPU, and 6 gigs of RAM on all the models. So one model doesn't have 6 and 4. All models from the 2020 lineup have 6 gigs of RAM, which is really cool. And when it comes down to the performance, what I can tell you is that I think both tablets are still extremely good performing tablets when it comes down to it. But the thing to keep in mind is that the iPad Pro from 2020 does have an additional 2 gigs of RAM if you don't already have the top tier model of the iPad Pro from 2018, so that 1TB model. Other than that, you are going to be getting better RAM management and be able to hold more apps in the background on an iPad Pro from 2020 than 2018. But in terms of the speed and the performance and everything, in my opinion, I think they're almost exactly the same. They're both extremely good tablets when it comes down to it. Like I said, I don't think one really blows the other one out of the water. And the way I would tell you is that going from an iPad Pro from 2018 to 2020, I would not go and upgrade just based on the performance itself. I think there's a lot of, maybe a few other things to upgrade from the 2018 one to the 2020. But other than that, I would not go from the 2018 to 2020 just based off the performance. They're both extremely good performing tablets. I even had, when I was going through my 2020 tablet or the iPad, you might see that sometimes it did glitch up a little bit, whereas on my 2018 one, it didn't hiccup as much, but it flip-flops a lot. Both are extremely good tablets in my opinion in terms of performance, whether you're a student or you're a graphic designer or you're planning on doing some, pretty heavy intensive things. These iPads should be able to handle it for the most part. However, one thing to keep in mind, like I stated, if you're planning on keeping a lot more apps in the background and you're somebody who constantly multitask out of things and all that, you might be better picking up the 2020 iPad over the 2018 iPad. But when it comes down to it, I would probably end up picking the 2018 one just because it is cheaper and because I know it's still a really good performing iPad. But if you're somebody who, just doesn't really care, but if you're somebody who, needs a lot more performance and you're using, heavy intensive things, you're video editing, photoshopping, all that stuff, you might be better off picking up that 12.9 inch iPad at the end of the day. So when it comes down to the performance, I think the iPad Pro from 2018 is still good enough for 95% of people watching this video. But I guess for the other 5% who needs, a higher intensive iPad, that 2020 iPad is probably the better way to go. Now hitting on the cameras, honestly, I don't know where I stand with this, okay? Because most people do not use the cameras on their iPads too frequently, so I will just keep that as a caveat. But the iPad Pro 2018 had the 12 megapixel sensor, a single camera setup. You were able to shoot 4K 60, which is really cool. However, with the new iPad, we do have kind of a dual camera setup, more like a triple. So we have a 12 megapixel wide angle lens, a 10 megapixel ultra wide sensor. Now we do have that LiDAR sensor, that depth camera, which was really cool. Now we can do 4K 60 on both. And with that LiDAR sensor, it allows us to do more, AR capabilities with that camera. So I think for a developer or somebody who's, using their iPad as a, if you're making apps and stuff for your iPad, you might be better off picking up something like the iPad Pro so you can develop on, because with that LiDAR sensor, Apple is probably going to be bringing it on our newer iPhones as well. And it's going to be a technology that's still up and coming and still developing. So having that type of technology on your iPad would be really cool for the people who are developing those type of apps and stuff. But if you're not, and if you're just somebody who just wants to use an iPad and sometimes use a camera on it, I guess the iPad Pro from 2018 is still perfectly good for a ton of people out there. So yes, the iPad Pro 2020 does have the better camera setup, but you have to ask yourself, are you going to be using it all the time? On the front, 7 megapixel sensors on both. We do have the capability of doing 1080p at 60 frames on the iPad Pro of 2020. With the 2018, we can only do 1080p at 30. So in terms of the outside and the cameras, I think that pretty much covers it. Again, are you going to be using it all the time? That's something you're going to have to ask yourself. So in terms of the cameras, that pretty much covers it. Now hitting and ending off with the battery life. So things are a little bit weird. They both have almost the same battery sizes from going from the 2018 to the 2020s. And I don't think you're going to be getting, a huge increase in battery life if you're going from one battery to the other, or going from one, iPad to the other. Now, one cool thing is that both do support that reverse charging aspect. It's not reverse wireless charging, but if you plug in through that USB Type-C port to another device, you are able to charge it, which is really cool. So these iPads have always, had pretty decent battery life in their body. So for sure, at the end of the day, the battery life is going to be pretty good for the most part of whichever one you get. Again, if you get that 12.9-inch model, you might get better battery life at the end of the day, but I always found that the 11-inch models had pretty good battery life too. So to sum up this video and to answer the question, because this one is a pretty long one, I'm not going to lie, should you pick up the iPad Pro from 2020 or the iPad Pro from 2018 and 2020? What I will tell you is, I think both of them have their pros and cons. But I think if you're trying to save the most amount of money and get the best value per dollar, I think the iPad Pro from 2018 is just such a good tablet still. I think if the iPad Pro from 2020 was a 10 out of 10, the iPad Pro from 2018 is like a 9.5 out of 10. It can almost do every single thing that the new iPad can do except with that LiDAR sensor, in my opinion. But again, I'm not too sure how many people are going to be using that on an everyday basis. So I think for the most part, that really pretty much covers it. Again, if you want to pick them up, links are down below. But that's pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. All those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. More importantly, everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.